Hello guys, this is Jessica Williams, author of the Gateway to Imagia trilogy. Today I will be reading the Gateway to Imagia, The Tale of Sam Little, and we'll be continuing on where we left off at Chapter 4, Deception. Sam and Yetus followed their new companion through the forest as they set off on this new course of their journey. Kisa bound gracefully ahead of them as they went forward through the trees, often pausing when she caught a new scent. Sam was perfectly at ease with the situation. Adventuring was all he ever really enjoyed doing at home, and the time for his pretend play had come to an end. It felt odd to be doing something so real. To feel the fur clutched under his fingers, tickling his skin, to breathe in the scents of the forest, to feel the sun's warmth on his face. The scene of everything around him was beyond brilliant. Kisa had led them out of the darker part of the trees. The sun was still high above them, its warmth filtered through the dense canopy, leaving beams of dusty light to guide their way. He wasn't really sure where exactly they were headed or how long it would take to get there. It didn't really matter. He felt it was his duty to help Kisa in her time of need. Though this tender creature was nothing like the ones he had imagined, he felt a connection to her. He sensed her desperation. He considered the situation she was in with her lost cubs. He couldn't blame her for wanting to find them so badly. A mother would go to the ends of the world to help her child. Though he was young, this much about life, he understood. A sudden wave of memories came back to Sam as he walked through the dense forest. One in particular stood out in his mind. When he was 8 years old, he remembered a fishing trip at a river. It had just rained, and the water was moving fiercely. He had gotten too close to the edge, where it was far too steep and muddy, and fell in before his mom could grab him. He could still remember the cold water rushing around him as he started to slip further from the bank. But more than anything, he could remember the loud splash near him and the firm, protective grasp of his mother's arms around his body as she pulled him back to dry ground. As he was thinking of this, he began to think about what his parents would do when they found him missing from his bed. He really hadn't been gone very long. According to his watch, only a few hours had passed. They probably assumed he was outside getting into some kind of mischief. How little they knew. Surely they wouldn't have been too worried already. But then again, he had spoken so often of his desire to go into the forest. If they had even considered for a moment that he had gone into the forest, would they have already begun to search for him? What would they find when they looked? How much trouble was he already in? He'd probably be grounded for life at this point. Perhaps they would go into the forest and look for themselves, or maybe even form a search party. His thoughts did nothing but make him feel a pang of guilt. The feeling sat like a ton of rocks in his stomach. This was not a particularly good feeling to have, and began to damper his good mood. So rather than continue with these upsetting thoughts, he tried to convince himself of another scenario. He stumbled through his thoughts. The only thing he could come up with was that time couldn't work the same here, if it was day already. Luck might just be on his side, and his parents would not even know he was missing by the time he returned. It would probably only take a few more hours to find what they were looking for. His adventures never lasted more than a day anyways, and by that time he could sneak back into bed and it would be as though nothing had ever happened. And come to think of it, Titus's warning bark wasn't really that loud. Maybe his parents hadn't even heard it and were still oblivious to his absence. It was working. He felt better already. The silence was doing nothing good for him, so he opted to start a conversation with his distraught companion. Sam cleared his throat. Kisa? Where are we going anyways? He asked her. She was ahead of them when Sam spoke. She had to slow down to answer him. You really shouldn't raise your voice so loudly. I may not be enough to frighten you, but I am certain that there are things out here that could do the trick. Oh, sorry. Sam couldn't help thinking how she reminded him of his mother with her tone of voice. The guilt he had attempted to bury surfaced a moment before he considered what she had said. If there were frightening things here, then he couldn't have possibly been the one to imagine them. Nothing in his imaginary world was ever really frightening. Mostly, when the part called for it, he would simply pretend to be scared. In reality, he wasn't sure he would know what the sensation of fear would be like. He had no memory of that particular feeling, which is why he assumed he was so brave. Kisa interrupted his thoughts. Nevertheless, I think I've completely lost my children's scent, so I'm leading us to the nearest water source to see if I can pick up anything familiar. I'm not sure where we are headed, but I smell water in that direction. She gestured with her head. This part of the forest is unfamiliar to me. I've never had a need to venture this way, and though I'm not all too keen on the smell of it, there is definitely a water source close by. What do you mean by not too keen? Sam asked. Well, it smells a bit off, not quite right to me. She paused to sniff the air. Sam didn't like the sound of that, and he could tell that Yetus wasn't exactly thrilled either. It was a very strange thing to say about water. He didn't really know what could make water smell bad to someone, but this was a strange new world. Maybe here water was not what he knew water to be. At this point, he believed anything could be possible. If a cat could talk, then water could be mud for all he knew. It was starting to feel more and more unlike his imagined world that was so dear to him. I don't think it's dangerous. Kisa seemed to sense their hesitation to continue. I'm sure it's nothing more than a dead animal that can easily foul any water. Yetu stopped so suddenly that Sam nearly flipped straight over his head. He turned to face and look up at Sam and grumbled something as he impatiently pointed in the direction they were headed. Sam wanted to calm him down, but didn't know what to say. All he could manage in reply was, I don't know. They all had stopped now, Kisa sitting on her haunches and facing them. Is there a problem? I can go on alone from here if you'd rather turn around. Sam looked at Yetus briefly and translated for her. Well, it's not that we don't want to help you, it's just that he doesn't like the idea of the dead thingy. He didn't want to admit it, but he was also a little concerned about the idea of seeing something dead. Death had definitely never been something he had imagined. The strangeness was getting worse. Well, logically speaking, of course, if it's dead, then whatever it is, it can't really hurt you, can it? She said. Oh, it's not really the dead thing that bothers us, or him. It's the thing that killed it that makes him scared. As Sam said the word, killed, he realized just how serious this situation could be. He was only a few hours into this world, and things had already changed so much. His knowledge and familiarity of this place was beginning to grow faint. She was shaking her head slowly to reassure them. I never said anything about something killing something else. Honestly, I'm sure it's nothing. Now, we really must continue on. I fear for my young ones. If your choice is to part ways, then please do so now, and let me be on my way. She was growing impatient. It was strange to be following a creature through the forest towards unfamiliar places, especially a creature who seemed so human. Usually, Sam was the one doing the leading, but he wasn't about to stop now. Even though it was completely unfamiliar, it was still exciting. He had already made up his mind and tried to nudge Yetus with his knees, but they didn't budge. They seemed to be annoyingly locked again. If his knees wouldn't work, then he'd just use his voice. We aren't going to leave you. We want to help. It's just that you surprised us. That's all. Right, Yetus? Yetus opened his mouth to grumble his opposing side, but blinked twice, and then sighed heavily instead. Kisa was already up and moving by this time. She was a few yards ahead of them when she spoke again. Good. I think that the water source is just ahead of us in this direction. Not far now. Sam's attempt at a conversation didn't do any good. It caused nothing but tension. He didn't really feel like dealing with that chance again for now, so they continued on in silence. They went on for about half an hour before anyone spoke again. By this time, he'd finally thought of a question he was eager to know the answer to. He asked Yetus to let him down so they could be on her level to talk to her. Though Yetus was uncomfortable with Sam so far from his reach, he complied and plucked him off his shoulders. He adjusted his stride to match Sam's. Kisa heard the boy trotting up to her and glanced over her shoulder. She slowed her pace when she saw him coming to her. "Another problem, Sam?" she asked him. She didn't seem too upset anymore, so he figured it was safe to talk again. "No. I was just wondering about something. Can I ask you a question?" What can I ease your mind about this time?" He smiled at her. "No, it's not like that. I was just wondering why you said something earlier. Before we left, you said it was strange that I can understand Yetus. Then you said a word I didn't understand." "Which word would that be?" "Well, I think it sounded something like Lorthax." She looked over to Yetus and smiled. "Well, I suppose it doesn't necessarily mean anything. It is what he is, or at least what they are commonly called. Strange that you didn't know that. But I've also never heard of one with a name." "Yetus! You're a Lorthax? I mean, there are more?" Sam was completely shocked by this discovery. He wasn't just a single creature that he had imagined up. The idea that there were others like him out there was a possibility that he'd never fathomed. Yetus didn't say anything. He just shrugged as if he had no idea what she was talking about. Kisa went on. "Yes, well, I've never seen one that looks like him in particular. What I mean is that I've never seen any herds of his type." Sam was confused. "But I thought you said he's a Lorthax, and that you'd seen them before." "Ah, I see where I've confused you. Yes, he is a Lorthax, but I suppose Lorthax is more of a general term. Lorthaxes are basically large beasts with unintelligible speech. There are countless creatures like him. They're generally a jittery bunch. You'd think something so large would have a bigger spine." She was smirking. Yetus frowned back at her and grumbled something low. Sam chuckled. "I don't think he likes being called stupid. But if I can understand him, then he's not a Lorthax, right?" I suppose." This was plenty to keep Sam's mind busy now. It opened up a floodgate of questions he wanted to ask, but he didn't even have the slightest clue where to begin. He was overwhelmed now. So instead, he lingered on the idea of multiple creatures that were similar to Yetus. As his mind wandered, they went back to walking on in silence. When Sam started to fall behind, Yetus picked him back up to ride again. Kisa's sleek body gracefully darted through the trees and undergrowth as she led them towards a clearing in the trees just ahead. It really wasn't very far from where they had stopped earlier, and Sam could see the light of the clearing breaking through the canopy. The forest was thinning, and he could even see a glimpse of something that shined like glass stretching across a grassy meadow. But it wasn't glass. It was a pond, or perhaps even a small lake. The closer they got to it, the more spectacular it looked. The water was crystal clear. The sun gleamed down on the surface, revealing brilliant shades of blues and greens. Sam jumped down from Yetus's shoulders to get a closer look. Kisa slowed her pace and approached the water cautiously. She sniffed the air and looked around. "Look at it!" shouted Sam. "It's amazing!" She sniffed the ground around the water's edge. "Yes, amazing. I've never been to this water before. It appears to be safe, but there's still something strange in the air. I can't place it, but as extraordinary as it seems, I don't think it wise that we linger here." She seemed concerned. How anyone could smell anything bad here was beyond Sam. He breathed deep. It smelled like the first day of spring, when he would get to go outside for the first time after a long winter indoors. The air was fresh and clean. He started to walk to the water's edge to get a better look. "Please be careful, Sam. It doesn't smell like the water holes where I frequent." He scoffed silently at her. She sounded just like his mother, always wanting him to be careful. After all, he just wanted to look. Yetus grunted at her with a shrug and followed Sam towards the water. He didn't seem to notice anything out of place either. They both stood at the edge, looking eagerly at the water, gazing into its depths. Tiny schools of purple fish darted around playfully between the lush green plants growing on the bottom. The sandy bottom even looked clean. He had been to a beach once, and it looked just like the soft white sand that he had walked through. The water didn't seem to be too deep around the edges. It was enticing. They had been walking for a while now, and seeing water made Sam realize how thirsty he was. The reflection of the water sparkled in his eyes. In the background he heard Kisa warning them to be wary. But how could she not be as thirsty as he was? And hot! He realized all of a sudden just how warm he was getting. They weren't comforted by the shade of the trees anymore. It made the water inviting in another way now. Yetus must have been parched because he was licking his lips. Sam's mouth was equally as dry. He heard Kisa asking them to back away from the edge, but he didn't understand why. If she was worried about him falling in, then she didn't have to be. He was a good swimmer. He couldn't take his eyes off the water when he answered her. "Just a quick drink. I'm really thirsty." Yetus nodded in agreement. Sam was set on quenching his thirst. It would just take a minute, and then they could go. They both crouched at the edge. Sam cupped his hands and plunged them into the cool, clear surface, while Yetus watched him. He brought the water to his mouth and drank deeply. It tasted perfect. It wasn't enough to refresh him, though, so he cupped his hands to drink again. As he swallowed, a peace started to wash through him. He thought he could hear someone in the back of his mind telling him to stop drinking, but he wasn't done yet. He must have been more parched than he realized. It felt wonderful. He could feel the water filling his stomach. Suddenly he was aware that the cool of the water wasn't only on his inside. He could feel it on his ankles. The water was moving up his legs. He didn't remember walking into the water, but it felt good. It was the perfect temperature. Then, out of nowhere, the floor of the lake trembled and shifted. Sam could feel the water rising towards his waist. A small voice echoed in his head, warning him of the danger he was in, but peace clouded the irrational part of his mind. The ground beneath his feet trembled with more ferocity. As the water started to slosh angrily around him, he could hear Kisa roaring from somewhere behind him, and in the faint, familiar sound of Yetus growling. The water darkened. Its perfect clarity was gone, replaced by a picture he didn't understand. The sky was masked, and he was covered in shadow. Replacing the sky was a set of teeth surrounding a large mouth that had led to a massive hole that could only be a throat. The water was at his chest before Sam could realize that he was in serious trouble. He wanted to react, to run away, but his mind was too foggy, making it impossible to move his feet. He couldn't shake it off. Suddenly, Sam felt two strong hands lock onto his shoulders and wrench him backwards out of the water. The same hands shoved him out of danger as he was freed. He landed heavily on the grass, still unable to move. There was a faint cracking sound of glass as his wrist came down hard on a rock. He tried to shake his head to clear his thoughts, not sure what had just happened, but he couldn't even do that. The only parts of him that seemed to work right were his eyes and ears. Towering above him was a sight that dwarfed anything he had ever imagined. The lake was gone, leaving a gaping crater in the ground. A creature of mind-boggling size was staring down at him with glassy black eyes. It had lost its prey and was bellowing in fury. Though he couldn't move, he suddenly felt the weight of a warm, hairy arm shielding him. There beside him was Yetus, soaked and trembling, shielding him from the danger at bay. Sam looked up at the creature. Its bottom jaw was like a pelican's that held the water so eagerly just moments before that he'd been drinking. Its eyes were pitch black. It resembled a cross between a monstrous salamander and a menacing crocodile. He didn't know how it was possible, but this creature was the lake. It was massive. And just when it couldn't look any more intimidating, the beast roared, causing the ground to quake. A giant scaled leg unearthed itself from the ground. The creature was moving. Kisa was in between the monster and Yetus, crouched defensively. Her growls and hisses were drowned out by the commotion. Sam was shaking from head to toe, unsure if it was from shock or the cold he now felt from being soaked. Never had he wanted to run so badly as he did now. Yetus continued to use his body as a shield, his eyes wide in terror. For a split second he wondered how Kisa could call him spineless. The hands that had pulled Sam free just moments ago once again grabbed him and pulled him out from under Yetus's protective arms. He was being pulled away to the trees. Yetus and Kisa followed in retreat. When he reached the safety of the tree line, his rescuer leapt over Sam's head as he laid on the ground staring in shock. The man pulled an arrow from a quiver on his back. In one fluid motion, he shot 3 separate but perfectly aimed arrows at one of the beast's great eyes. They pierced the blackness at the same time as its other leg had unearthed. It shrieked in agony, or perhaps it was anger. It closed its injured eye and raked at its face with its clawed leg to remove the source of its irritation. It shook its head, raining water down onto the ground. It gave one last echoing roar before settling its body back into the crater. It opened its jaw, revealing the crystal-clear water once again. The head of the lizard shuddered as it faded from view like a mirage turns to heat waves. It once again became camouflaged into the forest background, readying itself for the next unsuspecting prey. The only proof of the turmoil was the residual trembling of the once still water. Mere yards away, the stranger stood defiantly with his back to the traveling trio. He seemed barely winded from the effort. Sam wanted to know who he was. He wanted to thank him and to see his face. But the shock of everything took over. As his savior turned to face him, everything faded to black. Okay, that was chapter 4. And I'm going to do another reading and hopefully release it kind of back to back. And I'll be doing the next chapter, and it will be chapter 5, Course Change. So if you finish this one, you should be able to read the next or listen to the next one here in about another day. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed chapter 4, and I will see you next time. Bye.